As I'm trying to wrap my head around these newfound concepts of reincarnation being some sort of a recycling process of souls and energy for various purposes, I decided that I wanted to come back to David Icke and hear more about what he has to say, because he's the one that really kicked off this entire exploration that I'm going on right now, that kicked off my recent dive into astral projections, my reading of Leaving the Trap, my new me diving into Gnosticism. It all began with a random David Icke video that I saw and that I wanted to talk about. And the reason why I have renewed interest in David Icke in particular, somebody who a lot of people thought was completely off the reservation years ago or decades ago, is because, dude, we're living in the craziest time right now with the Epstein files, and so many of the things that David Icke was alleging decades ago that were seem bananas. Okay, banana. I'm not saying I necessarily thought he was off his rocker by any means, but I think most people did. I was trying to be as open minded as possible, but definitely a lot of the things he was saying were unique, even compared to people like Stephen Greer or other folks who have been called conspiracy theorists. But a lot of the stuff he was saying about, you know what, the P word that I'm not going to say, was centrally linked to all these people in high places. I was like, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from? And then now it's coming out to be true. It's absolutely incredible. It's astounding. It's disgusting, but it seems to have a ton of merit. And David Icke was saying this way before we ever heard of Epstein or any of these guys. I mean, you got to give the guy so much credit. So as a result, I've been listening to his interviews as of late, because I'm like, dude, oh my God, like all this stuff he was saying has come true. And that's what led me down this crazy path where I didn't even know he talked about this stuff in the astral or reincarnation and whatever. But as I've been getting interested in this topic, I went back and saw a video of David Icke. He just happened to be talking about the same thing that I'm now obsessing over and fascinated with near-death experiences, giving credibility to near-death experiences, but then in the same breath saying we have to be very mindful of them and that they're not necessarily presenting a true uh, a, a true picture of what the whole story is about. And that really piqued my interest. I'm like, what? I didn't even think that was possible. I thought this was true testimony. So anyways, this is the circle that I've gone on. Now we seem to be back at David Icke for more explanation and more examination of, then, well, what is this all about? You know, that's what this video is really trying to dive into, is like, if it is a big reincarnation trap, why? What is the purpose? And I think some of this ties back into ideas of Gnosticism. I don't know if David Icke has also researched Gnosticism and that's where he gets some of his ideas, but it seems to tie into this idea of, from the Gnostics, that the world is not this perfect, beautiful creation by an all-knowing, like the ultimate source, but in fact by a lesser godlike deity. Maybe it could be actually what we would consider an extraterrestrial or an interdimensional being. It's some prison of sort that has been fashioned and created. Simulation ties into simulation theory that people are talking about now, which is also wild, which a lot of physicists have mentioned as being a very plausible explanation for this reality in this universe. But talking about that this simulation or this trap or whatever it may be being built for the purpose of some sort of energy extraction, like we're all batteries. Kind of reminds me of the Matrix. Wild stuff. So anyways, we're back at the source of where all this questioning began, and I found this amazing video of David Icke from just a few months ago that I wanted to share a couple of highlights. This is from his channel, and we're going to go through some of these amazing clips. So first, we're going to talk about his first thoughts on the idea of reincarnation and how near-death experiences plays into this idea of reincarnation. That's where I really first firmed up my thoughts and ideas about reincarnation being an absolute true thing. It's just like you hear these stories over and over, and they all talk about having brief life reviews. They're also talking about remembering and seeing back into past lives. And it makes sense too on a deep intrinsic level, just that our souls and our consciousness is eternal. So why not? Why couldn't it have been in other bodies or other forms, right? If we accept that general premise. If you deny that premise, that's another story. But I think if you really think logically, or at least that's how I feel, you accept that premise, it makes total sense. So here's David Icke first talking about the notion of reincarnation and why this is a fully accepted part of inhabiting life forms and being in this dimension in general.
We're in such a challenging environment, such a challenging energetic environment. We need to be a bit kinder to ourselves and realize we are in a seriously challenging situation. So they talk about, and
I want to stop it real quick right there when he talks about us being in a challenging situation. This is actually something that I've touched upon in recent videos that's got me thinking more and more, again, in line with the Gnostic idea that the world and the planet and the universe is really not meant to be a place of happiness. It's by default a place of, it's a trap, it's a prison, it's a bit of a tormenting place by design to extract this negative energy. And so I think that's a really interesting point that he makes. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. We're so quick to attack each other for doing untoward things or maybe bad things, and maybe we're directing our energy at the wrong thing, the wrong people, the wrong entities. We shouldn't be getting mad at each other for so many things that go wrong. Maybe who we should be not so mad and maybe a little bit more forgiving. Perhaps we're doing things that upset people or hurt other people, but because largely in part of the circumstances that we're in, the world that has been created, like we're set up to fail. I just made a video about this earlier today, and I think this is what he's alluding to. Just an important principle to keep in mind as we keep going down all these different avenues of exploration. But anyways, let's let David Icke continue on reincarnation.
Talk to these people and read their accounts, and millions of bloody near-death accounts now. And I came to the conclusion a long time ago that reincarnation is real. The reincarnation of consciousness, not the reincarnation of the body, it just dies and disappears. Reincarnation of consciousness in and out of this reality in so-called different lives. And these people that can remember their between life, if you like, between human life experience, they talk about how detailed it is deciding what you're going to do next or what you're going to experience next in the human world. Because I started to realize that this matrix, this simulation, is not just the human level. There's another level of it, which is known in esoteric circles as the astral level. And the Buddhists have this concept of the wheel of samsara, where you keep leaving the human level of what I would say is the simulation, and you go into this astral level and you keep coming back. And it's like, round and round forever. And as I looked at these accounts of near-death experiences, of going up the tunnel to the light at the end or following the light or whatever, and the common themes were kind of the massive, like if they were a Christian, they would maybe see Jesus. If they were a Muslim, they might see a Muslim figure, a Hindu figure, right? So, right. And if you're a Christian and suddenly someone who looks like Jesus, and by the way, there is nothing in the Bible that describes Jesus. And the figure we call Jesus, the image we call Jesus, was Renaissance artists who decided that's what he.
Okay, well, anyways, his point is that when we see that figure, his point is that we're more inclined to believe whatever they are saying or leading us towards that is true, because we're seeing a familiar face or we're seeing a deity that we had worshipped or prayed to our entire lives. Oh my God, it's true. And you go with whoever is calling you, go into the astral, you agree to do a life review, and you agree to come back, and so on and so forth. He's saying that that's part of the manipulation by design. And what he's talking about is, depending on your faith, you might see a different figure. Now, this is talked about as well in many near-death experience accounts that I've listened to. Sometimes they will see Jesus, usually if they're strongly Christian. You don't usually see like Muslims or people of other faiths being like, oh my God, I was expecting Jesus and I saw this figure. I usually don't hear those accounts. It's usually hardcore Christians saying they see Jesus, Buddhists saying they see Buddha, non-religious people saying they see family members. And one of the explanations that's given for this, seeing a figure that you're familiar with, is not necessarily, if you take away the idea that, oh yeah, you're seeing the truth, you're seeing the proof of your belief system. One of the explanations was, well, the idea is to ease you into that transition. So you're presented with somebody that you recognize. And so you're not too scared and you're like, oh my God, it's who I expected. And then maybe you're nudged into whatever the reality that they want you to believe, and so on and so forth. But like, if you think about it, it's just so weird now that you think like that everybody sees something different. Even if you were thinking the wrong thing, but you're really going into this beautiful astral plane that's meant to be a place of like pure peace and joy and all this stuff. Like, why begin it with a manipulation? Why begin it with something to make you feel comfortable? Why not just blast you with the light and the truth? And it doesn't matter. Nothing would matter at that point. So this adds up to me, actually, the more I think about it. I used to be on the hardcore side of like, man, the NDEs are the truth and really showing us the way. Oh my God, I didn't even know this information existed. To now really questioning it and taking this similar vantage point as David Icke, that, yeah, it does kind of add up more so to be a manipulation as opposed to really trying to help us. Because why would, if you're really going into a light of pure clarity and knowledge and connecting with the one source, like, why would that begin with like these different experiences that are meant to make you feel comfortable, as opposed to just being like, hey, you're here, let me give you the truth, let me just break it down? What, like, people are going to freak out in that plane or that field anyway? So I thought that was a very interesting observation that David Icke and other folks have made. Now, here's a part where he talks about the common themes both on this planet and also in the astral. And this is also from many accounts that I've heard, talking about when you get up there and you have a life review. You either talk to one or three or multiple figures. People say have varying numbers of figures that you talk to, but it's almost like you go before a court and you have to look back at your life and look at mistakes you made, look at good things, look at bad things. And he makes a note on this idea of a common theme of authority, like that theme of authority, looking up to authority figures or authoritative institutions, these themes that we have on earth play out in the astral. And I thought that was very interesting also, because I talked about this earlier today, that it does seem like if this world is one big manipulation and one big prison, and it's perhaps it's emulating like what we're seeing on earth with all the lies and manipulation here, perhaps that's an emulation of the larger system as a whole, which if its whole intent or design is to confuse and manipulate us, it would make sense that we'd seen these same strategies or tactics of manipulation being played out on this planet, which I think we're all waking up to. Clearly that is what's happening within our political systems, our government systems, and it's all within the system of elites or whatever you want to call it, which is all now being exposed, which is wild. So that also kind of resonates with me. But anyways, let me let David Icke talk. I talked enough. Let me let David Icke take it away about this common theme of authority that we see in the astral.
But what I was looking at with these near-death experiences and these common themes is that they were seeing religious figures or that related to their belief, that they were seeing maybe loved ones or whatever. And if you're a Christian, like I say, and you see the figure you recognize as Jesus, I say they're projections, but it's all in the book. You're going to follow him. Of course, you're going to follow him. You've been programmed to follow him here. If you see a figure you relate to Islam and you're a Muslim, you're going to follow him, aren't you, up the tunnel? And then the common theme is that they go into this life review, right? And often this life review is held and overseen by what they call elders. This is common theme, constant. And they're in the robes and they have the long white beard and they're wizened, wise old men. Well, hold on a minute. In the astral, there is no aging. It's a completely different level of reality. The aging is something that relates to this simulated level of the matrix we call human. So why wizened old men? Because what are we programmed to believe here in the human world before we leave? That wizened old men are a symbol of wisdom. So these wizened old men then tell these near-death experience people that they still have lessons to learn. It's their karma. Karma, a load of old bollocks. It's their karma. And therefore, you've got to go back. And this is what these people that can remember their between life experience talk about, that the next life is decided and worked out on the basis of what they still have to learn, right? And what I saw was that the human world and this astral world have enormous common themes. And one of them is giving your power away to authority.
It's pretty crazy. It's pretty deep. There's a couple of things that I thought of as he was talking as well. It's funny, if you didn't know about near death experiences or hadn't studied them as in depth as like myself at this point, and you then came across this David Icke video, you'd probably be like, what is he talking about near death experiences? And why is he even where's the merit to this? I never heard about this. This sounds crazy. What is a life review? This is nuts. So it's like, you have to come across this type of content at the right time in your journey for it to make any sense. But if you do come across it at the right time, just like I did when I first heard of this, it hit me a particular way. It made me feel very uncomfortable at first. That's how it goes when you're sort of bought into a particular narrative, and then something pulls the rug out from under you. It's uncomfortable, especially if it's a negative change, if you will, if it's a negative spin on something that I thought was truly positive. So I think it's very important to come to David Icke or these type of statements or this type of framework at the right point in your journey. But yeah, I think that's really interesting, this idea of authority. And so much of what people describe really does seem like some sort of a manipulation. There's one NDE in particular that stands out to me. If you can find it on YouTube, I've actually made a video about it that really that David Icke has really gotten me rethinking about it. It's this woman that has an accident, and she goes up to the same thing. It's a council of a bunch of entities, and they're deciding about what injuries to give her, whether she should have brain damage or different things when she returns. And they were all sort of like discussing the different challenges that she would have based on these injuries. And I remember she said that they were laughing, like they would imagine her having a massive brain injury and not being able to communicate effectively. And they were falling on the floor, cracking up and thinking it was so funny to imagine all these different permutations of difficulties that she would have to deal with for the remainder of her life. And the way she explained it in the near-death experience recount in the video was like, well, the reason why I think they thought it was funny is because if you place somebody in a room, let's say in a haunted house overnight, and they're terrified, they're freaking out all night, like, yeah, that's a horrible experience for them. But you might find it funny because you ultimately know that they're at no danger, no risk, no harm. They're going through this experience and they're thinking they might die or get seriously harmed. But you know, from your outside vantage point, because you set up this fake haunted house, that they're going to be fine. That's why you would find it funny. And so it kind of makes sense that they might look at life in this way and so on. And I thought, okay, that kind of makes sense. They know ultimately this is for your benefit, I guess. You're learning lessons when I've bought into that narrative. But now when I think back on it, that seems really perverted, because even though you might know that that person may be all right at the end, but they're still going through real suffering in real time during those traumatic experiences. They're still traumatic and they're real to them. And then what is the lesson learned when you go through these horrendous experiences? I mean, we do learn from pain, I'd like to think, but that's more of, I think, our decision on how to interpret negative things and how to bounce back and how to be resilient. But like, do our spirit, like, I think that makes sense for us while we're in this life on this, with this tabla rasa, as we come in a blank slate, as we come into this life and we learn to navigate. Sure, the difficulties toughen us up and make us stronger, but what about on a time span of no time, of a limitless time span of our soul's existence? Do our souls really, or do our energies really need to learn these lessons through pain, through trials and tribulations? Or do we already know everything and we're just in a simulation of sorts where we're cut off from our infinite knowledge and kind of fooled and manipulated into thinking that we need to evolve and grow and get better and improve? But really, maybe we're already there. And maybe we only are succumb to follies and errors and problematic ways of behaving by virtue of the system that we're placed in. We're placed into this artificial system where we have to eat and consume and destroy to survive, where we are riddled with different emotions, jealousy, different things that conflict with each other. We're riddled with, many of us, wanting to have romantic relationships, and then wanting to have other ones, and then we hurt people, but we're following our own physical bodies and like our urges, and like are we just set up to fail? Like, the more I think about it, I feel like maybe we are. Maybe we're not so bad after all, but it might be the circumstances that we're placed in that are running us through all of these issues. And then on top of that, if you read Journey of Souls and some of these other books, they talk about people's entire lives being thought out ahead of time and planned out. So it's like we're being sent in knowing that we're going to have to go through and even make these like terrible decisions. We already know what we're going to do. And then are we learning and we're educating our, like, it just, it's making less and less sense the more, the more I think about it. And this idea of it being one giant manipulation is really resonating with me. Plus, on top of that, it also lines up with the Gnostic idea. Not saying I'm fully like a Gnostic or I'm fully into Gnosticism, right? This is an ancient thing that I still have my reservations about, for sure. A lot of these themes and philosophies are extracted from very ancient texts, but it is kind of interesting that it lines up with this type of stuff. Okay, move on to the next clip. So why are we in this cycle? Even the Gnostic explanation of a demiurge, that's not necessarily satisfying in and of itself. Like the demiurge created this bubble, this universe, this multiverse, and he's trapped us in there, and he's kind of having us go back and forth in this prison. But like, for what is he getting out of it? If that's what we're to believe. But David Icke in this clip explains what it all is, and it's essentially a farm. Just like if we have a cattle farm, a lot of these animals, we keep having them reproduce and keep being having them being born into these situations where they're raised up and they're living lives, and then at some point they're slaughtered to feed the masses, to feed all of us. And that's what he kind of says is happening with our energy, that our bodies that these bodies are being created and our souls are being thrown back into them to extract a lot of this energy. And that is the food source for these other beings, whether they're entities like the demiurge or whether they're reptilians or whatever, whatever they are. But it's essentially some big, massive farm, and we're the food, or our energy, our negative energy is the food. So I'll let David Icke explain much better than me.
You're on this wheel of samsara and you keep going round. So the next question, why? What's the frickin' point of creating this illusory reality and then creating this reincarnation stuff?
Okay. That's the first clip. He goes off on a tangent after that. That's why I had to break it up into two clips, because the interviewer like jumps in and starts asking him questions. I'm like, dude, he's about to get into the mix of all of it. Okay, so now he picks up in this later clip.
The question is, as I say, why? What's it all about? What's the reason? Well, and this actually will also explain why satanic ritual and why human sacrifice ritual, why it's been going on from the ancient world and is still going on in secret now. There was a guy called Robert Monroe, and coming back to what you mentioned earlier, he was a very skilled astral traveler. For people who haven't come across this, astral traveling is the ability to project your consciousness, as your mate said, project your consciousness into this astral dimension, not as a near-death experience, but while you're very bodily still alive, but you project it into the astral dimension. And you can experience the astral and what have you. Now, he became very skilled. He wrote a series of books. He was a media executive, actually, he started out. He wrote many books and popularized this astral traveling phenomenon. And he became so skilled at it that the US military got involved. The psychological part of the US military. And they did a study. It was called Gateway. And what they did was, and the CIA declassified the report some years ago now. They got together other people who had this ability to astral travel, to project their consciousness into this other dimension that's very close to this one. And the study was, well, what did they experience? And are there any common themes of what they claim to experience? Well, first of all, these people, these astral projectors in the Gateway study, they came across so many reptilian entities in the astral dimension that the study gave them the name the alligators. Oh, I've seen some more alligators, right? And what Robert Monroe said, and this is confirmed by others too, is that he learned in his astral travels over many, many, many years, that these entities are feeding off human energy. But it's a particular type of human energy, low vibrational human energy, which relates to fear, hatred, anxiety, depression, regret, remorse, all of it, all these low vibrational energies that bring us down, that are the result of events in the world and our lives that give us this emotional kind of turmoil. And they're feeding off it. And when you again do the research into in mainstream science, every time we feel emotion and every time we think, we're generating a frequency. And that frequency relates to the nature of the emotion and the nature of the thought. So joy, happiness, peace, appreciation, everyone getting on, is a high vibrational energy. No good to these entities. They want the low vibrational energy because they're in a low vibrational state or they wouldn't do what they're doing. So in simple terms, these creators of this illusory reality have no interest in a world of love, a world of joy, a world of happiness, a world of peace, none of it. They want to constantly, through their global cult network, to constantly create events, wars, suffering, anything that would generate low vibrational emotional and mental energy, because they're feeding off it. And they have created this matrix specifically to hijack human perception in this low vibrational state. The more wars there are, the better from their point of view. The more upheavals there are, the more suffering there are, the more distress there is, the more you're trying to survive another week. Oh my God. All this stuff is giving off the energy that they want. And Robert Monroe gave this energy a name. He called it loosh. And there's a chapter in the roadmap called Loosh Farm, which explains all this.
I got to read this book. This is so crazy. It's still hard for me to get my head around some of this because it's very intense. It's scary, but it does make a lot of sense from the standpoint of why does it seem like we just can't get things right on this planet? Why do things seem to be getting a little bit better and then they just get worse? We just keep fighting and clashing, and then now all this crazy stuff is coming out from the inside of these elites. And what are they doing? Why are they all talking about? Dude, it's just I don't even want to talk about it and get into it, but you know what I'm talking about if you've been somewhat following what's been going on with the Epstein files. And like this narrative starts to make sense. I want to read this idea of the loosh farm, but so then my other questions, which I'm sure I'm going to have to answer at a later time, but I'll just tell you some of my open-ended questions still at this point is these alligators or these reptilians or whatnot, are these the constructors of the entire universe? Are they the constructors of just some matrix that's around this little portion of the universe around Earth, and then they have like some sort of matrix set up around it that captures our energy, and then like how exactly does this all work? And are these entities the actual creators, or are they just like some species that has existed and now is feeding off of this, and hence we're part of a farm system? But I don't know, right? Like there's just still so many more questions. But in essence, it dovetails with Robert Monroe, the Monroe Institute, the Gateway Project, which is something that we're going to talk about in a second, and which is something that is a verifiable program that is discussed in CIA documents. I have a quick excerpt from a CIA document that I'm going to show you in a second. But I think there's some major credibility to this theory. And yeah, it's just absolutely, absolutely mind blowing, especially if you're somebody who is really into near death experiences like I have been for the last couple of years. And then you come across this, it's It's mind-blowing. Now, if you're not familiar with Gateway, this is actually, I did pull this from, you just literally, anybody can search this, just type in Gateway CIA, you go straight to the CIA.gov website. This is from 1983, a document from U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell. And this is what he had to say on the gate. This is like an 18 or 19 page document. It goes into all this detail about the why and the science behind it and how you can astral project it. And it's very, very interesting. But this is the conclusion here. Okay. Just for anybody who's like, what are you talking about? Astral projection. I never heard about this, never read about this. Why isn't it studied in universities? What's going on? I called it BS. This is from CIA. There is a sound, rational basis in terms of physical science parameters for considering Gateway to be plausible in terms of its essential objectives. Intuitional insights of not only personal but of practical and professional nature would seem to be within bounds of reasonable expectations. However, a phased approach for entering the Gateway experience in an accelerated mode would seem to be required if the time needed to reach advanced states of altered consciousness is to be brought within more manageable limits from the standpoint of establishing an organization-wide exploitation of Gateway's potential. The most promising approach suggested in the foregoing study involves the following steps. And then I just included the conclusion here. But this is legitimate. This is real. This is disclosed from 1983. This is almost 43 years ago. So imagine what has been done since then and what has been studied thereafter. I mean, there's real legitimate. I mean, I bought in. I'm not even researching these documents for myself, just in case anybody wanted to know or just get a little snippet of this information. I thought I'd present it to you. And if you want to dig deeper, it's all there. You can do your own research and look deeper. But anyways, there it is, a deeper dive into this material. Courtesy of David Icke and courtesy of Bob Monroe. Very, very fascinating as we continue to try to piece together this puzzle. Oh, like I've said in many videos, I hope you guys enjoyed this take, and I hope you guys appreciate the way that I'm trying to do this, which is not from a place of authority or from a place of expertise. Far from it. I am just a person trying to learn, just like so many of you out there, and I'm just trying to come across information and share it with you guys in real time, and hopefully that will not only give you guys information to also digest and ponder, but I'll continue to learn from this and maybe hone in better and better into what this world and life and purpose of life is all about. But I want to do this and continue to want to do this from an open mind, because as William Bowman himself says, author of Adventures Beyond the Body, beliefs are blocks. I felt that for a very long time. That statement is just going to sit with me and rock me forever, because I've always felt like that. I'm like, most people, when you get out here and you have a debate or whatever, you're already set in your way that Christianity is the end all and be all, atheism is the end all and be all, and then you just hammer it out back and forth. It's like, why can't we come together and have a mutual exploration and just of what is out there and just try and be logical and objective, as opposed to having these baked in beliefs or thoughts and then just hammer it home and be like, oh, the debate's the best way to really get to the truth. Like, no, it's not. Most people come in siding with one debater or the other, and they get just more entrenched in their views as the debate goes on. They're like, oh, the things that my guy said really add up, and he smoked you in the debate. And the other people, they didn't change their mind. I don't think that's the way to get to the truth. The way to get to truth is to simmer down, let our beliefs dissolve away, and just read and just learn and just discuss and really try and have an objective journey for truth, as opposed to letting our egos get involved. That's the way I see it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.